We're back with Tom Gantert, managing editor of Michigan Capital Confidential. I do trust Tom, and that's why I'm having him on. Tom is the first guy, and he loves to jump on my Facebook page, and his favorite thing to do is to correct me. He loves giving me a hard time. So I'm having Tom on because Tom writes for a more, you said probably more of a libertarian type of
I
publication,
call
would
it
you
free
say?
market
Free market. But
or
but
limited
you,
government.
yeah, but you surround yourself around with liberal friends, liberal family, and you definitely have a judicious nature. You'll call people out on both sides, including me. So you hold us accountable, Tom. So we were just talking about, how we fact check, and it should be all of our responsibilities instead of just quoting people to actually look at the facts. So right now, I think let's move on to WikiLeaks. That was a eye opener, huh?
Well, you know, to me, WikiLeaks and like journalists, and like we just talked about Project Veritas
Hmm.
with James O'Keefe. Um, these are all things that are being done under some controversy. Okay, meaning that it was a criminal act. What happened with WikiLeaks? We wouldn't have known about that, what was going on journalism wise,
Hmm.
had not, someone broken the law.
Well, here's the
Journal.
thing, real quick. Hold on, let's stop real quick though. The same people though, and I agree with you to a point, but the same people that are saying it was criminal what WikiLeaks did, why can't we just classify them a whistleblower like they're doing, and all these, when it suits them, they'll call people a whistleblower, a lot of these people in politics. But when it's something that ends up, exposing something they did, they tend to call it, someone that, they're basically illegally, whatever. I can't think of the term, but what do you think?
I think that the thing that I see in common with journalists, WikiLeaks, and Project Veritas with James O'Keefe is that it's all going. Uh, all this was happening kind of under a layer of not knowing what was happening. Okay, none of the stuff was out for us to read. It was all stuff going behind the scenes that we would not have known about had not
Mhm.
these things happened. So like we wouldn't have known about Glenn Thrush
Mhm.
had WikiLeaks. It would still be in the dark that a top political reporter was sharing
Right.
articles before they're published with a top Hillary Clinton campaign
Right.
manager. So these things are kind of new technologies. You know, uh,
Mhm.
with journalists that was a uh, free private chat room. The best way to
Yeah.
explain it, where
Sure.
somebody leaked it to
Mhm.
other people. You had to be
Mhm.
approved to get into that. Not anybody could go on in. It wasn't something like like Facebook where somebody's posting public. It
Right.
was a private chat room. And there's a
Right.
lot of people. If you read the stories that came out about it, there's a lot of reporters who are liberal who thought that that was an invasion of privacy and that reporters have a right to have an opinion, which I agree with. But there's a difference what's going on now with the people at Politico and New York Times and Washington Post, and that is this. If you remember Patch, they came out with AOL came out with Patch about I want to say 2009 2010. It
I
failed,
don't remember
but
that.
the idea was they started all these small news sites. Okay,
Mhm.
when the Ann Arbor News closed, I know a couple of reporters who went to work for them, and it was called Patch. It was run by AOL, and the idea was is that the reporter who ran these sites, and they were local news sites, so it was like they were out in Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills. The reporter had to say what his political viewpoint was in his
Oh
biography.
wow. Oh
They wanted
wow.
that out front. So,
Mhm.
the reporter would say, "Here's what it is, and here's my political viewpoint." When with my site, that's what we do. We say we're a free market, limited government news site, and we put that in our
Mhm.
about, and you'd know that by reading our site. Okay,
Right.
so we're upfront about that. The
Mhm.
problem I have with a lot of the news sites today is they don't want to admit that. They want to pretend they're
Mhm.
centrist, and that's just not the way it is. And
Mhm.
then what happens is you get these aha moments, where a reporter is caught saying something or doing something, and then they get in trouble because that's not what the newspaper wants the word to be about
Right.
what they're doing. Like the New York Times just came out, or I want to say just came out, but maybe it might be a year now ago, that they stopped their reporters from posting on Facebook about politics. Okay. And the reason why is because it was making them look like far left organizations. And,
It was
there
just
was
exposing that they were, come on, let's be real.
right. And, the New York Times also had a moment where they had, and I believe it was a work private chat room that I think it's called Slack, for lack of a better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Slack has this private thing. Well, the New York Times newsroom's Slack was released again, like journalists.
So
it got out, and
and
you saw the very far left views of the New York Times reporters shared in stories.
Didn't hear about that either.
Well, right, and it's like they didn't want that out there because they don't want people to think it's a far left newspaper. But I think it's come to a time, Jamie, where like I'm a conservative. When I see people post about, can you believe the Washington Post and their bias? And it's just like, this has been going on long enough now that it shouldn't be surprising.
Right.
You shouldn't be surprised the Washington Post has a biased outlook on the things they report about.
Does the fact that Jeff Bezos owned the Washington Post, is that a fact? Do you think that contributes to does he have any?
No.
I mean, I know he owns it. No, you don't think so?
I'll tell you why. I worked in newspapers from 1983 to 2009. So what's that? 26 years. The decisions, the everyday decisions about what gets run in a newspaper and what doesn't get run in a newspaper, which really bias isn't just about what you report. It's also about what you don't report,
True.
So the decisions in an everyday newspaper that lead to how this article is going to be written, how this headline is going to be written, never gets to the level of Jeff Bezos. Okay. It's done at the reporter level, and it's done at the mid-level editor level. And then maybe a top editor might get involved in it. But for the most part, that's what I call ground floor decisions. Ground floor decisions are made by reporters and editors, and almost exclusively, in my experience, those are liberal people. There's not very many conservatives.
Well, I mean, even the New York Times, I mean, even let's just say maybe even 5 to 7 years ago, pre-Trump, let's say. I mean, you knew that they lean left, but there was still a form of legitimacy there. I mean, you felt like you could quote them. And I'm not saying that they always have stories that are hacks. I mean, yes, I'm sure they have plenty of, fair reporting. However, even after the 2016 election, they had to come out and say, oh, yeah, by the way, because they had printed some stories. I don't know if it was a rush to print or what, but they had said some things that were, I don't know if it was inaccurate, but it was definitely overtly biased. And again, maybe it was, not reporting on certain facts and highlighting others. But they came out and they said after the election, oh, yeah, hey, sorry about that, but we're going to try and do better in the future. And then since then, I think they've had like 2 or 3 stories that they've had actual corrections on because, and I believe it was in reporting on Trump, if I remember correct, but I could be wrong on that. But, it's like, where do we go from here? I mean, if you have nobody to trust, it seems like, what do you think about foreign media like BBC and all that? Do you think that they are better at accurately reporting the news? I mean, they do cover, and then you have like the Daily UK, and it used to be the Daily UK Mail, but now it's just Daily Mail because they are now opening, I think they're starting to come into America and trying to compete here as well.
I don't have much experience with the BBC. I can tell you I've read and heard about them, and of course, listened to them on the radio over the course of my lifetime. What I've noticed about the BBC is they're I guess we call highbrow, but one of the ways that they'll have a conversation about politics or about a political issue, and I see this with Washington Post too, and they'll pick a panel of people a lot of times and have like a roundtable discussion, and the viewpoint that I would have is severely underrepresented in these panels, and the viewpoint that I have is also the person that they took that they're having as my voice is not very good at it either.
Yeah, right. That's like the view. They take the most leftist Republican, and I don't watch them because they're just hacks, but they never put on a real true conservative, and if they do, they can't hold their own. Like, you never see them going, they always seem to bulk at some point. So I mean, really, McCain's
But
daughter is the face of that. I mean,
well,
that's not.
that's kind of celebrity,
I know
celebrity
for
news.
sure it's not a form of news, but I'm just
BBC
saying as
is
an example.
BBC
Yeah.
won't bring on Bill Maher, okay, but one of the people, but the expert they do bring on are lacking in what my viewpoint is, because I'll
Right.
listen to them and I says, like, I know this guy's trying to represent me, he's just doing a really piss poor job at it.
What are the people that pick on Fox News, or that I shouldn't say pick on? I mean, some of it is definitely fairly, I get that, but what's your take on Fox News? I mean, obviously they are supposed to be the voice of they'll say we report, you decide, and they do have a lot of times a balance. They do have both sides on there if it's something that they're not just reporting the news on. But they do tend to have, they obviously have their Sean Hannity's, Tucker Carlson, as much as people don't like him. I mean, he's more of a libertarian. But then you have, and now I know that Fox News is just, I think his Rupert Murdoch's son took over, if I remember correct. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe his children are
And
running
then,
it.
and I actually heard that they have a new board, or more board members, and they're starting to lean more. They're starting to try and go more left or whatever. But I don't know. What are your thoughts about Fox News?
I don't think Fox News is a news channel. I think it's a commentary channel.
Hmm.
I think when people say Fox News is biased, they talk about Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck when he was on there. I have not watched Fox News in 12 years because it's just a political opinion.
Yeah.
You know, the reporting that goes on almost all cable channels, and it's just not Fox News, but is stuff that is rarely broken by the news channel itself, but they're
Hmm.
reporting something else that happened. So, for example, just take something like Kobe Bryant's death. Okay,
Hmm.
that story is broken by TMZ. Okay,
Right.
so all the cable channels then hop on TMZ and then start reporting from there on. Now that's a news story, but all the commentary that goes on about Kobe Bryant would be the equivalent of what goes on in Fox News with politics. For example, I did watch Bill O'Reilly
Hmm.
when he was on, and I found him interesting. But he pretty much he was opinion, and he was
Hmm.
it was the newspaper equivalent of a newspaper columnist. Here's my
Hmm.
opinion. Here's what I think, and he would say his thing. That's not reporting. Okay,
Right.
there was precious little reporting going on in cable news. There was a lot of commentary.
Yeah.
Okay,
So is it
so
fair? So is it fair when people try to post the Fox News articles in a debate for people to say, "Oh, that's not real news"? Well,
well, I would
what do you
try. I
think?
was wondering what Fox News article they would post that you couldn't post from 16 other different news sites. If it's on Fox News as a news story, then it's on 20 other news sites too, because that's the
Hmm.
echo chamber that we live in now. So
Right.
let's take any example. A the ones that I see all the time. A teacher sleeps with a student. Okay,
Right.
that's going to be on Fox News. That's going to be on
Hmm.
CNN. That's going to be on 20 different news sites. You know,
Hmm.
so I think that there's a also I want to make a distinction here between what we're looking at and bias. When you and I talk about bias, we're talking about a uh, a specific type of story. Okay, something that is what I call political red meat. Okay,
Hmm.
so guns, uh, abortion, gay rights, um, you know, politics, Trump, uh,
Hmm.
any of those things that you see, those are things that when we go to look at a story, we're going to find certain biases in. And
Hmm.
those are the stories we're talking about. You can go and for the most part, a crime story is just going to be reported the same by all news elements, by all
Right.
the industry.
Hmm.
You're not going to show your bias there. A shooting at Sandy Hook, for instance, a school shooting, those stories are going to be reported the same.
Mm-hmm.
What the difference comes is when we look at things that are politically motivated.
Yes.
Guns. Like my sister sends me a a link to a story about gun shootings and says, Tom, how do you fact check this? And I said, there's a national database that if you want to check, you know, where all these school shootings are, you got to get on Google. I'll give you an example. My sister sent me one about school shootings in Michigan. So we start looking at these school shootings in Michigan, and what we find out is that some of the ones that are listed as school shootings are gang-related shootings after hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, this is a midnight shooting, and it happened
Oh, jeez.
after a
And
play.
they report it as a school shooting.
Right, they do, but you don't know that until you get on Google and start looking at
Right.
what the other news sources
Okay,
report.
so let me ask you this. Do they purposely report it as a school shooting at the, at the core reporting or at the core numbers because even they have an agenda when they do that? I mean, why would they report that as
It
a school
depends on
shooting?
what site you're on. Some of the better sites will list where the school shooting was and what type of shooting it was, and you
Mhm.
can check it. But you have to go and you have to click 2 or 3 times to get to their itinerary of here's our data. Okay,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it's like not many people do that. Okay, so
Right.
they get what it does is it allows them to make a claim about school shootings, but then they also say, hey, we got all our information here. So, but it's like, do people take the effort to say, wow, 6 school shootings in Michigan, And then,
Right.
personally, I was like, I know about 6 school shootings in Michigan, but then you find
Yeah.
out some of them are suicides, where a
Right.
kid
Okay.
goes into a restroom and shoots himself and kills himself,
Mhm.
unfortunately, and that's counted as a school shooting. So all those things factor in, and that's why, when you talk about fact checking with my sister, I said, what you have to do, you have to go through each one of those things, Google it, find out what school it was in, and then
Mhm.
read about what happened, and then you get the real information on what kind of a school shooting it was. I recently did that with my own news site, and it was very eye-opening to go through and figure out. I was reading about the school in Lansing. I
Mhm.
want to say it was there was a school shooting in the 70s in Lansing, where
You don't remember which
um,
one? Was it one of the high
did you know
schools?
about that, by the way?
The school shooting in the 70s?
Yeah, in Lansing, a kid killed, I think, 2 kids.
No, I don't think I've ever heard that. I mean, if it was at Sexton, they would have had that all over the place because anytime something, it can happen in front of Eastern and they'll be like 5 miles from JW Sexton. I mean, we always got a bad rap. I went to Sexton. I mean, it seemed like we always got that rap, It was like we did a skit on it in drama one time. Always. It could have happened in East Lansing and it would have been 10 miles from JW Sexton. They just always seem to want to pull us in there. No, I hadn't, but I hadn't heard that one, no.
Well, I'm going to look it up and tell you what it is because, but go ahead.
No, no, that's so it sounds to me like I mean, we can all blame the news for it, but it sounds to me like a lot of us have a responsibility to check our facts too. I mean, if we're going to take the time to go and argue, our favorite whatever, our favorite issue, then we should really take the time and instead of just going and pulling up, news sources, we really should if we all started doing our fact checking and everybody was diligent about that, I mean, that could probably hold some of these, quote unquote news sources accountable for what and how they report it. But what do you think about James O'Keefe? Do you think what he did was ethical?
Okay, I want to read you back. February 22nd,
Yeah.
1978, Lansing Everett High School, a 15-year-old sophomore shot and killed one student and injured another. The shooter had been teased about his interest in Nazi artifacts. 1978.
Oh wow. I was
That
two.
would have been Everett, February 77th. That would have been like the year after Magic left.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'd never heard about that. Wow,
And
huh?
I think that's the thing is when people talk about school shootings, it's like they're always, oh, it's so much worse today than it was in the past. It's because you didn't get 24/7 coverage of it back then.
True. Yeah,
You
that's
lived
true. You
in
can't get on
Lansing.
the line and see the skies
Yeah.
falling everywhere,
Uh,
basically.
okay, so you asked me about James O'Keefe.
Yeah.
I don't approve of his tactics, but you can't argue with his results. I'm
Yeah.
transparent. When I send an email to somebody, I tell them who I am and who I work for, and I ask a
Hmm.
question. The downside of that is you don't always get the truth. I think what James O'Keefe
Right.
has shown is that a lot in the media is, Facebook, Google, CNN, they're lying. They're lying about their intentions and they're
Oh.
lying about what they're doing. And
Well,
it's
why?
unfortunate because he's finding this out, you know.
Right. I mean, it does seem like it's kind of a double-edged sword there. I mean, but I mean, the one obviously the shocker is punting the Jeffrey Epstein story. You have the woman on camera saying she had that story, and they basically kicked it and said, no, it's not gonna. I can't remember. It was like
That's
NBC. It was
been
one of those
reported by
main.
other news outlets, though. I've seen that story before. What O'Keefe is best at, first of all, I don't consider James O'Keefe a journalist. Okay,
Mm-hmm,
uh, I don't, I just don't. Okay, his
mm-hmm,
tactics are everything that a journalist would be opposed to. Okay,
mm-hmm.
going undercover and pretending to be something you're not is disingenuous. And his results, I can't argue with. Acorn, things that he has discovered, with union members. And the thing is and the sad part is that what he's uncovering is the truth, and what we're being
Right.
told is not the truth, and that's why he's thrived. He's
Mm-hmm.
thrived because he's working in a disingenuous environment, and he knows it. He knows he can go into Facebook and Google and get people to say what's really going on there, and
Mm-hmm.
it flies in the face of what we're being told, um, and that's why he's so successful. But I have a hard time considering someone whose sole method of operation is to deceive
Do,
people
do you think
being.
there's a do you think there's a reckoning coming? Do you think that at some point this is going to correct itself because people are so fed up with, and they're going to pay for it. People aren't going to read, they're going to lose subscribers, they're going to lose views and all of that. Obviously, we're seeing print papers are really struggling too. I mean, that's just the nature of, with the internet now, or do you think we're just going to keep devolving into this kind of chaotic two truths, type of thing going
Well,
on?
I'll tell you this. I've had my problems with Snopes, but if there's a Facebook meme out there that is taking a shot at liberals, they do a decent job of explaining where we got our information from and here's what we found. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a problem with Snopes. The problem is that Snopes we know is liberal because they never do really any fact checking in any of the liberal lies out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all anything that's taking a shot at liberals that could be misconstrued as inaccurate. They're on, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's like how are you devoting your resources? And I'll give you an example. Trayvon Martin.
Mm-hmm.
At one point I counted, I want to be accurate here, so off the top of my head, I don't want to exaggerate here, but I think it was 9. But the New York Times had 9 byline reporters covering Trayvon Martin. Okay? That
Mm-hmm.
means they had 9 full-time employees down there working, okay, doing the story because it was that important to them. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, a lot of the Facebook was like, there was 3 African-American kids that shot an Australian man who was just running, just because they wanted to. And I believe it was in Arizona. It was out
Mm-hmm.
west, right? So he was from Australia, and he was just out running, and these 3 African American kids saw him and shot him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and all through the Facebook thing, it was like New York Times won't cover this. New York Times won't cover this. You know what New York Times did? They took the wire copy, the AP, and ran a story on it. Okay, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't devote any of their resources to that actual story about what happened and why these kids did it. They pay a subscription to Associated Press and ran the
Mm-hmm.
Associated Press story, which means none of their own internal sources were
Right.
used. So the thing is, if you want to know what bias is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, you look at what is the newspaper using its resources for. Like, back at MLive, people is, what is MLive's bias? If you remember
Mm-hmm.
Dave Ajima, politician,
Yeah. Yep. Oh,
they,
yeah. I
they
remember.
had as
He was
many
a
as
controversial figure
they
for a
had as
lot of
many
people.
they had as many seven to 8 different reporters writing on his Facebook posts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've done stories on what politicians have said on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
that MLive never did a story on. Superintendents calling politicians mental midgets and stuff like that, and morons. And it's like,
Right.
so, I mean, it's certainly Dave Ajima wasn't the only person on Facebook saying controversial things, but he was
Yeah.
the only one being tracked by MLive because, well,
Right.
it's conservative. There's a friend of mine, I don't want to say friend, I've never met him, but he's troubled. And he's on Facebook, and he's the guy who he was he ran for political office, no
Mm-hmm.
money, no backing. I mean, anybody can run. And
Right.
he was the guy who was breaking into cars and performing sexual acts.
Oh,
remember that?
geez. Oh,
Um,
yeah,
do,
I
do
do.
you
I think
remember
I
the
do.
story?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
MLive was all over it, and their story was Republican politician. It's like this
Right.
guy, this he had as much chance as winning
Right.
as Winnie the Pooh did. He was
Right.
just a guy who was like, hey, I can run for office, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And there was nobody running because it was an established Democrat, if
Hmm.
I'm right. But I knew he had no chance of winning. But because he was a Republican, it was big news, and they were making fun of him. And it
Right.
was a very embarrassing situation. I felt horrible for the guy because he was troubled.
Hmm.
But the newspapers kept on doing the story over and over and over again, and people were laughing and stuff like that. And I was thinking, if this guy's a Democrat,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
probably not have done the story.
Like the one actual representative down near the Detroit area, he got caught like assaulting his girlfriend or something, and he had a weapon, or I
Shot.
think
Yeah.
he got arrested for that. And I mean, if that was a Republican now, I mean, that would probably make national news, I would think. I mean, you always see them just go after that, but I mean, we have to wrap this up now because
All right.
I know people have attention issues, but we should maybe cover this again in the future and go into more specifics. But thanks, Tom. I appreciate you coming on here because like I said, I always appreciate it because you give me just as much crap as you do the left. So I at
All
least
right. Thanks, Tammy.
trust your judgment. So we'll talk again soon, Tom. Thank
All right.
you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.